I want to tell you about the day I learned that silence can be louder than any scream. Not the silence of empty rooms. The silence of a person who has decided not to say what they are feeling. My people, the Kelvith, do not have that kind of silence. We cannot have it. When we feel something, we release it into the air, a scent, a signature, chemical and honest. Fear smells like burnt copper. Anger smells like wet stone. Grief smells faintly sweet, almost like overripe fruit, which none of us have ever found a way to explain to outsiders without sounding strange. You cannot lie to a Kelvith nose. You cannot even lie to yourself, not for long, not in any way that matters. On my homeworld, this shaped everything, our courts, our marriages, the way children were raised to say exactly what they felt the moment they felt it, because the alternative, hiding a feeling long enough for it to fester unseen, was considered not just difficult but faintly unnatural, something closer to an illness than a skill. We built entire systems of law around the assumption that concealment, real concealment, sustained past a few careless seconds, simply did not happen among reasonable people. It never occurred to any of us to wonder what a species built the opposite way might be capable of noticing that we could not. This is why, when the station finally told us what was coming, none of us were afraid of each other. We were only afraid of the numbers. The numbers were simple, and they were bad. Halvan Reach was a deep-bore mining station, built into the belly of a cold rock with no name, only a catalogue number nobody bothered to memorize. We pulled ore from 3 kilometers down and sent it up on rails to a supply ship that was supposed to come every 40 days, carrying fresh rations, replacement filters, and the mail that made the isolation bearable. On the day this story starts, that ship was 11 days late, and the quota from corporate had gone up, not down, because someone very far away had decided that a delay was a good time to ask for more, not less. I am an engineer. Pressure seals and rail conveyors, nothing more. I did not choose to be part of what happened next. Nobody chooses these things. They choose you, usually on an ordinary shift, in the middle of an ordinary task, and you only understand later that the ordinary day was the last one you'd get for a while. Let me back up, though, before I tell you about Priya. Let me tell you what an ordinary morning looked like on Halvan Reach, because you need to understand what ordinary meant to us before you can understand how badly it slipped away. An ordinary morning began with the wake cycle lights coming up slowly along the crew corridor, a pale gold meant to imitate a sun none of us would ever see from inside 3 kilometers of rock. I would wake, check the pressure logs from the overnight shift, and walk to the mess for whatever the ration dispenser had decided to call breakfast that rotation. The air in the mess always smelled the same at that hour, the flat mineral note of recycled oxygen, a trace of engine oil drifting up from the lower decks, and, underneath all of it, the ordinary calm scent of 60 people who were tired but not afraid. That last part mattered more than I understood at the time. A station running well smells, to a Kelvith, almost like nothing at all. Contentment has very little scent of its own. It is only when something goes wrong that the air starts to speak. I bring this up because I want you to understand that Halvan Reach was not, in its ordinary state, a hard place to live. Isolated, yes. Cold in the lower tunnels, always. But we had routines, small comforts, an easy familiarity built from months of shared meals and shared work. Vantra and Sol argued cheerfully over drill bit rotations at every meal. Dossa ran a small unofficial tea service out of the medical bay twice a week. Using leave, she'd grown herself under a grow lamp she wasn't strictly supposed to have. I had a chess set, of a Kelvith variety built around scent bluffing rather than hidden pieces, and I played it against anyone willing to lose to me slowly. Priya fit into none of this, not because anyone excluded her deliberately, but because none of us knew what to include her in. You cannot invite someone to smell the calm of a good morning. You cannot easily explain a game built on scent bluffing to someone who has no scent to bluff with. So she sat at the edges, and we let her, and none of us thought very hard about what that cost her, because none of us were ever required to. There were 60 of us on Halvan Reach that season. Kelvith, mostly, for the deep tunnel work, since our exoskeletons handle the pressure well and our joints don't ache the way I'm told softer bodies do after a 12-hour shift underground. A pair of Gurn twins, Sol and Vantra, ran the drill heads, because Gurn hands can feel a half degree of temperature change through 3 layers of glove, which matters more than you'd think when a drill bit is 2 degrees from seizing. An Ictri named Dossa kept us alive in the medical bay, patient in a way I never fully understood, since Ictri live 4 times as long as the rest of us and seem to carry that patience the way we carry scent, without effort, without choosing it. And then there was Priya. Priya Sen was human. She had been hired 8 months earlier for a job that, on paper, made no sense at all. Every mining station this size is required, by corporate policy, to carry one crew welfare officer, someone trained to notice when a crew is under too much strain, before that strain becomes an accident report. Usually this job goes to an empath species, someone who can taste the mood of a room the way I taste the mood of a tunnel wall before a drill goes through it. Halvan Reach could not afford one. Empaths are expensive, and their contracts come with hazard premiums most stations quietly resent paying. So the requisition office did what requisition officers do when a line item is expensive and a rule says it must exist anyway. They searched the open contract boards for the cheapest labor that technically satisfied the qualification, and the cheapest qualified labor that season happened to be a 31-year-old woman from a planet 3 sectors away, with a psychology degree, who had never worked off her own world before in her life. Nobody on Halvan Reach believed a human could do that job. And I will tell you honestly, neither did I. Humans have no sense signaling that any of us could detect. Their faces barely move, and when they do move, none of us had any training in reading what the movement meant. Dosser examined her during intake and told me afterward, half joking, in the dry way Iktru joke, that scanning a human for emotional state was like scanning a rock for opinions. You could measure its temperature, its density, its mineral content, and learn nothing at all about what it thought of you. The Gurn twins called her the mute one for the first 2 months, not unkindly, just factually, because to them she genuinely seemed to be missing a sense the rest of us all shared the way you or I might feel sorry for someone born without sight. Station Chief Rail Thurn had signed her contract without much thought at all. I later found out, from a private channel I was not supposed to have access to but occasionally did, that he told his second-in-command hiring her was mostly a way to satisfy the welfare officer requirement on paper without spending real money on someone who could actually do the job the requirement was written for. I did not dislike Priya. I simply did not think about her much, which is, I understand now, a small and quiet kind of cruelty, the kind that doesn't feel like cruelty from the inside at all. She sat at the edges of the crew mess, ate her rehydrated rations without complaint, wrote things in a small paper notebook that she never let anyone read, and asked polite, careful questions of people who mostly forgot to answer them, myself included. That was the world 11 days into the delay, when the numbers were bad and getting worse, and none of us yet understood that the most dangerous thing on Halvan Reach was not the rock beneath us, or the quota above us, or the late ship somewhere in the dark between. It was the things people were choosing not to say. On day 12, Chief Thurn called an all-crew briefing in the mess hall, the kind that happens standing up because nobody expects it to take long and everybody is wrong about that. The mess hall on Halvan Reach was not large. Long benches, a serving counter that dispensed the same 3 ration bases in rotating flavors, a viewport that looked out on nothing but rock and the faint blue smear of a supply lane with no ship in it. 60 of us packed in shoulder to shoulder, plates set aside, waiting. Thurn stood at the front with a data slate he didn't need to read from, because he'd clearly read the numbers so many times already that morning they'd worn a groove into him. The supply ship is delayed further, he said. No new arrival estimate from corporate. I wish I had better news than that, and I don't. He paused. The way people pause when they know the next sentence is the one that actually matters. Corporate wants the quota held at the new number regardless. Effective immediately, rations will be cut by 1/3. Water reclamation runs on a tighter cycle starting tonight. Non-essential heating in crew quarters is reduced. The room smelled the way you would expect, if you could smell a room the way I can. Fear, sharp and coppery, rising off a dozen kelvith at once, thick enough that I could have located each source with my eyes closed. Frustration from the twins, a scent like scorched metal, the two of them standing close together the way they always did when something threatened either one of them. Dossa's scent barely changed at all, old and patient as ever, though even she released a thin, bitter note of concern that cut through everything else like a single dark thread in pale cloth. I watched Priya during all of this, mostly because there was nothing new left to look at once the announcement had landed and the room had finished reacting. She did not smell like anything, of course. She never did. But she was doing something I had never paid real attention to before. Her eyes moved across the room, slow, deliberate, resting on each face for 2 or 3 seconds before moving to the next, the way you might read a gauge you didn't fully trust. Not looking at Thurn while he spoke. Looking at us. Afterward, in the corridor outside the mess, rock dust drifting faintly in the recycled air the way it always did near shift change, I asked her what she'd been doing. Listening, she said. He was the only one talking. He wasn't the only one saying something. She tucked her notebook under one arm. You all announce your feelings out loud, into the air. That's actually very useful, if you know how to use it. I just have to watch what people do with the ones they don't announce. I told her, honestly, that I didn't understand what she meant. When someone smells afraid, and everyone around them can see they smell afraid, they usually act on the fear honestly, she said. They yell. They cry. They ask for help. It's the ones who feel something big and manage to keep any trace of it from ever hitting the air that worry me. That takes real effort, sustained over time. And effort like that has to go somewhere eventually. It doesn't just disappear because nobody smelled it. I thought this was an interesting theory, said politely, and did not think about it again for 6 days. I want to pause here and admit something I am not proud of. In those first weeks after the ration announcement, I watched the crew's treatment of Priya shift in a small, ugly way that none of us would have called cruelty at the time. Before the delay, she had simply been ignored, ordinary background inattention, the kind every new hire on an isolated station gets used to. After the delay, a few of the drill crew began, quietly, to treat her presence as a kind of bad luck charm, an omen that arrived just before things got hard. Sol made a joke about it once in the mess, not unkindly by his own measure, something about how the welfare officer had shown up 8 months before the worst rotation Halvan Reach had ever run, and maybe corporate should check whether humans carried some kind of misfortune the sensors couldn't detect either. Priya heard it. I know she heard it, because I was sitting close enough to see her hands go still around her cup for exactly as long as the joke lasted, and no longer. She said nothing. She finished her meal, wrote something in her notebook, and left at her usual time, and if I had not already begun to learn how to read her, I would have assumed the joke had cost her nothing at all. I did not defend her that evening. I want to say that plainly, because it would be easy to tell this story as though I understood her value from the very beginning, and I did not. I sat there, and I let the joke pass, and I told myself it was not serious enough to be worth the discomfort of objecting to it in a crowded room. I think about that evening often now, more than almost any other single moment in this whole account, because it was the cheapest possible kindness to offer, and I did not offer it. On day 14, one of the drill crew, a younger Kelvith named Ossick, filed a maintenance report claiming the number 6 oxygen recycler unit was running 8% under efficiency due to a filter fault. I checked the report myself, since recycler efficiency fell technically under my authority, and the numbers matched what the automated system was reporting. Nothing unusual. A filter fault happens, especially with usage this high. We scheduled a swap for the following rotation and I thought no more of it. Priya asked to see the report that same evening. This struck me as strange, since recycler filters had nothing obvious to do with crew welfare, but station policy gave the welfare officer access to any system log on request, so I handed it over without much thought. She read it twice, slowly, her finger moving down the columns the way I'd seen her do with other reports before. Then she asked me a question that, at the time, seemed almost insulting in how far outside her job at Saturday. Has Ossick eaten in the mess the last 2 shifts? I told her, a little sharply, that I did not track other people's meal schedules. Would you check? Please. I checked, mostly to end the conversation quickly. He had not. 2 shifts, no meal record at all, which for a 19-year-old on double drill rotation was almost unheard of. Has he said anything to anyone about the ration cuts? I asked around, quietly, between tasks. The answer, from 3 different Kelvith who worked near him, was the same. No. Nothing. Ossick had gone quiet the exact day the cuts were announced. In a crew where going quiet was the single strangest thing a Kelvith could do, since we cannot help but smell what we feel. Except, apparently, when what we feel is something we are actively fighting, hour after hour, to keep buried. I think you should hold off on that filter swap, Priya said, and her voice had gone very level, very careful. I think I want someone with you when you do it. I told her, not unkindly, that this was not her department. She looked at me for a long moment, the same slow, deliberate look I'd seen her use in the mess hall, except now it was aimed directly at me. I'm asking you to trust something you can't smell, she said. I know that's strange for you. It's strange for me too, every single day, being the only person on this station who can't smell anything at all, who has to guess at what all of you already know instantly. But I'm not asking you to believe my conclusion. I'm asking you to bring someone with you anyway, when you go. It costs you almost nothing to have a witness. It costs a great deal if I'm right and you're alone. It cost me an extra 20 minutes and a mildly annoyed drill twin, pulled off her own shift early. I brought Vantra. We found Ossick in the recycler bay 40 minutes before his scheduled swap, already inside the housing, with a hand override key that should have been locked in the chief engineer's cabinet 3 levels up. I want to be fair to him, even now, because I think about him often. He was not a violent person. He was 19 years old, on his first off-world contract, sending most of his pay home to a nest clutch of younger siblings he talked about constantly and fondly on any shift where morale allowed for talking at all. He had done the math on the new ration numbers and the new quota numbers, the same math any of us could have done if we'd let ourselves, and concluded, not incorrectly, that Halvan Reach's corporate owners intended to work this crew well past the edge of what our bodies could sustain, and that nobody with real power over the station was going to stop it on their own. His plan, as it came out later in the incident review, was not to hurt anyone. It was to force an emergency evacuation order by taking the recycler fully offline during a shift change, when the corridors were full and the fault would be impossible to hide or quietly patch over before corporate noticed. He believed, and he was likely right, that only a hard system failure serious enough to threaten every life on the station would make corporate move fast enough to actually help us. So he had built himself a small, careful act of sabotage, dressed up as an honest filter fault, and he had told no one, and he had felt nothing about it that any of us could smell, because he had spent 6 days consciously, deliberately, refusing to let it reach the air. Vantra got the override key away from him before he could engage it, her long fingers closing over his wrist with the same practiced steadiness she used on a stubborn drill coupling. Nobody was hurt. Ossick didn't fight her. I think, in some way, some part of him had been waiting for someone to stop him before he had to find out whether he could go through with it. Dossa arrived within minutes and sedated him gently, murmuring something to him the whole time in a low voice none of the rest of us were meant to hear. Chief Thurn had him confined to quarters pending a formal report. Afterward, in the corridor outside the recycler bay, the air still faintly sharp with the copper of Ossick's fear finally, belatedly, released all at once now that the effort of hiding it no longer mattered, Vantra asked Priya the question I think we were all thinking. How did you know? He didn't smell like anything. None of us caught it, and we work beside him every day. That's exactly why I knew, Priya said. You're all so used to reading each other honestly that when someone stops broadcasting entirely, in a crew like this, it should be the loudest thing in the room. It's not that he hid his feelings well. It's that none of you are trained to notice an absence, because you've never needed to be. I am. It's most of what my species does instead of what yours does. We don't smell each other's truth. We have to watch for it. Vantra did not fully accept this explanation, I could tell, more from the stiff angle of her tail than from any scent, since Gurn communicate mostly through posture and I have never learned to read it well. But she did not argue either, and that alone was new. Chief Thurn's public reaction, when I reported the incident to him directly, was measured. He thanked Priya, formally, in front of the senior crew at the next shift briefing, and the words were correct, even generous. But afterward, alone with me in his office, going over the paperwork, he said something I did not repeat to anyone for a long time. She got lucky, he said, not looking up from the slate. A hunch that happened to land right. I'm not running my crew management on hunches. Kelmy. I can't be. I asked him, carefully, what he would have done differently, if not for the hunch. He didn't have an answer. But I noticed, over the following days, that Priya's notebook stopped being something nobody paid attention to. People started watching her write in it, out of the corners of their eyes, across the mess hall. Not with trust exactly. With a kind of wary attention, the way you watch a tool you don't fully understand but have just seen work once, and aren't yet sure was skill or accident. Dossa found me alone in the medical bay 2 days later, restocking a supply cabinet that did not particularly need restocking, which I understood even then was her way of finding an excuse to talk without making the conversation feel deliberate. You've started sitting with her, she said, not quite a question. Is that unusual? For you, yes. Dossa's scent carried its usual patient stillness, though there was something underneath it that evening, faint and considering. I have lived a long time, Kelmy, long enough to watch a great many crews decide, all at once, what to think of someone new. It is rarely fair, and it is almost never about the person it happens to. It's about what the crew needed to believe before that person arrived. We needed to believe the welfare officer requirement was a formality corporate forced on us, not a genuine need. Priya Sen made that belief inconvenient the day she was right about Ossick. I don't think most of this crew has forgiven her for that yet, if I'm honest. Being right, when everyone has already decided you can't be, is its own kind of insult to people who'd rather not examine why they decided that in the first place. I asked her if she believed Priya's methods, whatever they were, could really be trusted the way we trusted scent. I don't know if trust is the right word yet, Dossa said. I think what she has is attention. A very old, very patient kind, built the slow way, out of watching people who never expected to be watched that carefully. It isn't the same thing we have. But I've lived long enough to know that different is not the same as lesser, and I would rather learn that lesson early and cheaply than late and at a terrible cost. The way I suspect this station is still at risk of learning it. I began, without telling anyone, to watch her too. Not because I trusted her judgment yet, not fully. Because I had started to wonder what she was writing, and who else was in that notebook, and whether there was a name in there that mattered even more than Osic's had. There was. I did not know it yet. But there was. I visited Osic once, during his confinement, before any of the rest of this story had happened, mostly out of a guilt I could not fully name at the time. He was calmer than I expected, almost relieved to have been stopped, and when I asked him why he had never simply told any of us what he was planning, he looked at me for a long moment before answering. "Would you have believed me, Calmy?" he asked. "If I'd come to you a week earlier and said I was frightened enough to do something drastic, would you have taken it seriously, or would you have smelled nothing alarming on me and assumed I was managing fine, the way everyone else assumed it, right up until they found me with a key in my hand?" I did not have a good answer for him then, and I still turn the question over sometimes, because I think it is the truest thing anyone said to me in this entire account, including everything Priya ever taught me afterward. We had built an entire system of trust on the assumption that feeling could not be hidden, and it had never once occurred to any of us to ask what happened to a person determined enough to hide it anyway. In the 2 weeks after the recycler incident, Halvan Reach did not get better. The supply ship's new estimate slipped twice more, each time by a wider margin than the last, until the number itself stopped meaning anything to most of us. Rations were cut a second time, this time to a full half of the original level. Corporate sent one message in response to Thurn's increasingly urgent requests, brief and cold, refusing any adjustment to the quota, citing contract obligations that none of us had ever agreed to and none of us had the power to renegotiate from 3 sectors away. Priya kept doing her job, which mostly meant sitting quietly at the edges of rooms, asking careful questions, and writing in her notebook. I started sitting near her sometimes, in the mess hall, in the maintenance bay during slow hours, telling myself it was efficient to have the welfare officer nearby in case anything came up in my section that needed her attention quickly. One evening, in the mess, with the lights dimmed to the lower power setting corporate's cuts now required after a certain hour, she let me see a page of the notebook, which she had never done before. It was not names and accusations, as I had half expected, half feared. It was small observations, almost mundane, written in a careful, cramped hand. Twins eating separately for the first time since I arrived. Dossa's medical requisitions for headache treatment up 40% over baseline. Osic's bunkmate hasn't spoken above a whisper in 9 days. 3 separate crew members have started taking the long corridor route to the drill bay instead of the short one, for no stated reason. I asked her, that same evening, why she had taken a contract like this one at all. 3 sectors from home, the cheapest hire on the board, a job everyone assumed she couldn't do, on a station that hadn't bothered to learn her name for the first month she was aboard. She thought about it longer than I expected before answering. Where I grew up, there wasn't much work for someone who studies how people behave under strain, she said. Not the kind that pays a real contract wage, anyway. Corporate boards like this one don't usually want a human welfare officer. They want the box checked as cheaply as possible. I knew that going in. I took it anyway, because it was the only offer that let me actually do the work instead of just talking about it in a classroom. Even knowing no one would take you seriously. Especially knowing that, maybe. She turned a page in the notebook, not really looking at it. It's easier to watch a room carefully when nobody expects you to be watching it at all. Being underestimated isn't only a cost, Calmy. Sometimes it's the only reason I can see anything clearly in the first place. Nobody performs for the person they've already decided doesn't matter. I did not have a response to that, not then. I only understood it fully much later, once I had watched her do exactly what she was describing, over and over, in rooms that never once thought to hide anything from her, because none of us believed she was capable of finding it. "You're not looking for the next Osic," I said, understanding something for the first time, looking up from the page. "I'm looking for the shape of the whole room," she said. Osic wasn't the problem. He was a symptom that happened to arrive first. If I only watch for the next person who might do something dramatic, I'll always be one step behind whatever's actually building. I need to know how the pressure is moving through everyone, all the time, so I can see where it's going to pull before it does. And where is it pulling now? She was quiet for a moment, which for a human, I had learned by then, did not mean nothing was happening. It meant something was happening that she had decided, carefully, not to say yet. There's a cluster I keep circling, she said finally. A few names. I'm not ready to say them out loud. I could be wrong, and saying names to people who already don't fully trust my judgment could hurt someone who hasn't done anything except be tired and angry, which isn't a crime on this station, or shouldn't be. I want to watch a little longer before I turn a feeling into an accusation. I did not push her, though some part of me wanted to. I had started, somewhere in those 2 weeks, to genuinely want to know what she knew, not out of suspicion of her anymore, but out of something closer to respect I was not yet ready to name as such, even to myself. This is, I think now, the moment the joke stopped being a joke for me, quietly, without any single dramatic turn. Not because of one save in a recycler bay. Because of the ordinary, unglamorous discipline of someone doing careful work that nobody paid her enough to do, and that almost nobody had properly thanked her for doing. The change in the crew, over those 2 weeks, was slower and less complete than I think either of us wanted it to be. A few of the drill crew had stopped calling her the mute one, at least where I could hear it, though I suspected the habit continued in corners I wasn't present for. Sol, to his credit, apologized to her directly for the joke he'd made in the mess, awkwardly, in the middle of an unrelated conversation about filter stock, in the particular way people apologize when they are more embarrassed by having been wrong than genuinely sorry for the harm done. Priya accepted it graciously, the way I was coming to understand she accepted most things, without making it cost him more than it needed to. But Fessick, one of the senior haulers, still made a point of double-checking anything Priya flagged with someone else before acting on it, as though her judgment required a second signature from a species with a nose to be considered reliable. And Chief Thurn, whatever private respect the recycler incident had earned her, still spoke to her in a tone that reserved the right to be unconvinced the next time, which, as it turned out, was exactly the tone he used again 3 days later, when it mattered far more than any of us yet understood. 3 days later, the cluster in her notebook stopped being a private worry and became something all of Halvan Reach would have to face together, whether we were ready for it or not. Day 31 of the delay. The supply ship's newest estimate had slipped past 40 days late, well beyond any window corporate's own contracts guaranteed us in writing. Rations were now at survival minimum. Thin gruel textured protein base twice a shift and little else. 2 Kelvith had reported to DOSA with early symptoms of malnutrition, a dullness to their exoskeleton sheen that any of us could see from across a room. The heating in the lower tunnels had been cut so far that ice was forming, actual visible ice, on drill housings that had never iced once in the station's entire operating history. Small things had started failing that no maintenance log fully captured, because none of them were failures exactly, only the slow erosion of a station running on less than it needed. The mess hall's serving counter had started dispensing portions that looked, unmistakably, smaller than the numbers on the ration schedule claimed they should be, though every measurement I personally took came back with intolerance, which told me only that the tolerance itself had quietly narrowed at some point without anyone announcing it. Conversations in the corridors had gotten shorter, clipped, people moving past each other with less of the easy loitering that used to fill the gaps between shifts. Even DOS's unofficial tea service had gone quiet, not from any lack of leaves, she told me, but from a lack of anyone who felt they had a spare half hour to sit and drink it in. And Chief Thurn, under mounting pressure from corporate to keep the quota moving no matter the cost, announced an extension of shift lengths. 16 hours instead of 12, effective the following rotation. I was in the mess hall when the announcement went out over the station comm, a flat automated voice reading numbers off a schedule none of us had written and none of us could appeal. I want to describe, as precisely as I can, what happened in that room afterward, because it is the part of this story I understand least, and Priya understood best of anyone alive on that station. By every instrument Halvan Reach possessed, nothing went wrong. The pheromone sensors in the ventilation system, which monitor ambient sense signal levels station-wide as a rough proxy for crew stress, registered a spike, yes, but well within expected parameters for bad news delivered badly.
No alarms triggered.
No safety thresholds crossed. If you had asked the station's automated systems, that evening, whether Halvan Reach was in danger, they would have answered, honestly and confidently, no. Priya did not need the sensors. She stood at the back of the mess hall through the whole announcement and watched the room the way she always did, and afterward she came and found me and Vantra in the corridor outside, and her voice had a flatness to it I had not heard from her before, not even the night we'd found Ossic. "I need you to trust me on something bigger than a filter fault," she said. "I think there's a plan forming. Not one person, this time. A group. Maybe 8, maybe 12. I don't know exactly who yet, not all of them. But I watched that room just now, and I counted at least 6 people who did not react at all when the 16-hour order came through. Not smell afraid. Not smell angry. Nothing. Just still, watching each other instead of watching Thurn. That is not calm. In a room full of people who can't help broadcasting what they feel, a cluster of people who suddenly, together, broadcast nothing at all, means they've already agreed on something, and they're being careful not to give it away." "Agreed on what?" Vantra asked, her tail tied against her back. "I don't know yet. That's what worries me most. It could be a work slowdown. It could be a formal grievance, which would be the good outcome. It could be something that damages the station badly enough that corporate has no choice but to intervene, which would be a very bad one. I need time, and I need someone with real authority to actually listen to me before this finishes forming, instead of after it's already too late to talk anyone out of anything." We went to Chief Thurn together, that same hour. He listened, to his credit, longer than I expected him to. But when Priya finished laying it out, he shook his head, slowly, the way a person does when they've already made a decision and are only waiting politely for the other side to stop talking. "You're describing a feeling," he said. "You have no names, no evidence, no incident. I can't lock down a station or discipline a crew based on a feeling, from the one person here who admits, freely, that she can't even read the sensors the rest of us built for exactly this purpose." "The sensors didn't catch Ossic either," Priya said. "Not until Kelmy and Vantra physically found him with an override key already in his hand." "And you got lucky once," Thurn said, echoing what he'd told me weeks before, except now he said it to her directly, which felt different, harder, in a way that made the air in the room feel thinner even to me. "I run this station on evidence. Officer Senator, bring me evidence, and I will act on it immediately. I give you my word on that much." "Officer Sen," he added, before he turned to go, in a tone that was not unkind, only tired in the particular way a man is tired when he has spent weeks being the only person on a station allowed to say no to corporate and finding it changes nothing regardless of how he says it. "I want you to understand something. I am not dismissing you because I think you're foolish. I'm dismissing you because if I act on a feeling and I'm wrong, I lose every last bit of authority I have left to actually protect this crew when something real happens. I have to be careful what I spend that on. Right now, I don't have enough from you to spend it." "I understand," Priya said, and I believe she meant it, though it cost her something to say so calmly. "I'd rather you tell me that honestly than pretend to listen and do nothing. But I need you to understand something too. The evidence you're asking for doesn't always arrive early enough to be useful. Sometimes by the time it exists, in a form you'd accept, the thing it would have prevented has already happened. I'm not asking you to abandon evidence as a standard. I'm asking you to shorten how long you're willing to wait for it, just this once, because I don't think we have as much time as you're assuming." He walked away toward the command level, and Priya stood in the corridor for a moment afterward. For the first time since I'd known her, I saw something cross her face that even I, with no ability to smell it, could read without any real difficulty at all. Not anger. Something closer to grief, quiet and tightly controlled, the same kind of controlled feeling she had spent weeks teaching me, without meaning to watch for in everyone else. "He's not wrong to want evidence," she said finally, more to herself than to either of us. "He's wrong about how long we actually have to get it." We had 4 days before the 16-hour shifts began. Priya spent them the way she had spent every day since Ossic, watching, listening, writing. But now I watched with her, in whatever hours I wasn't in the tunnels myself, because I had decided, somewhere in that corridor outside Thurn's office, that I believed her completely, even without a single cent to confirm it. On the 3rd day, we found the shape of the plan, though not by any instrument, and not by any single dramatic clue. Priya asked quiet, careful questions of the 2 Kelvith who had reported malnutrition symptoms to Dossa, sitting with them in the medical bay during a slow hour, asking nothing directly about any plan at all, only about how they were sleeping, whether anyone had checked in on them, small ordinary kindnesses that happened, in the asking, to open doors. I sat in on part of one of those conversations, at Priya's request, mostly so there would be a Kelvith present who could read scent if either of them slipped into something they weren't saying aloud. The one I remember most clearly was a young hauler named Tessa, her carapace visibly duller than it should have been at her age, sitting on the edge of a medical cot picking at a ration bar she clearly had no appetite for. "I'm not asking you to name anyone," Priya told her, gently, sitting close but not too close. "I just want to understand what people are feeling right now, so I can help Chief Thurn understand it too, in a way that doesn't put anyone at risk of discipline for being angry about something worth being angry about." Tessa was quiet for a while, turning the ration bar over in her hands. "Someone talked to me," she said finally, "about the 16-hour shifts. About not showing up. Not just me, others too. It didn't sound like a threat when they said it. It sounded like relief. Like finally, someone had a plan that wasn't just waiting to see how much worse things get before anyone with power does anything." "Did they say when?" "When the new shifts start. All of the deep crew, at once." She looked up, and for the first time in the conversation, something like fear crossed her face, plain even to me. "I didn't think it was a bad idea until you started asking me questions like this. Is it a bad idea?" "I think the people who came up with it are angry for good reason," Priya said. "I think the plan itself could get someone killed in a way that has nothing to do with the reason for it. I'd like to find a way to fix that before it happens, if you're willing to help me understand it a little more." From those conversations, gently, over 2 hours, she learned that both of them had been approached separately, by different crew members, with a version of the same idea. When the 16-hour shifts began, the deep tunnel crews would simply not report. All of them, together, at once. Not sabotage. Not violence. A full, coordinated work stoppage, 3 kilometers underground, in a tunnel network that depended on continuous drill head monitoring to stay structurally stable at that depth and pressure. It was, in its own way, a reasonable plan, born from real and justified anger. It was also, Priya explained to me and Vantra that night, close to the most dangerous thing that could happen on Halvan Reach at that moment. A sudden, unmonitored stoppage that deep, with drill heads left mid-cycle and pressure seals unattended for even a few hours, risked a structural failure that could take out the entire lower tunnel network, and possibly any crew still down there when it happened, whether they'd meant to stay that long or not. The people planning it were angry, not reckless, and I do not believe any of them fully understood the seal risk. Gurn engineering training covers it in detail. Kelvith drill training does not the way it should. And the 12 or so crew members organizing the stoppage were, as far as we could piece together, entirely Kelvith drill and hauling crew, people who had never been taught to fear the thing they were about to do. Priya went to Chief Thurn again that same night, this time with names. Not accusations, she was careful to say, more than once. Names, and the reasoning behind them, and the specific structural danger the twins confirmed in detail once we explained the shape of the plan to them, drawing it out on a slate in the corridor outside Thurn's quarters at an hour when he clearly hadn't wanted visitors. Thurn listened. This time, he did not walk away. "If I go in hard on this," he said slowly, turning the slate over in his hands, "confine people, threaten formal discipline, I confirm every fear they already have about this station and this company. I make it worse, not better." "If you do nothing," Priya said, "you get a structural failure in the lower tunnels, with people still inside it, because they're angry enough to stop caring about the seal risk, or simply don't know about it at all, and nobody ever told them clearly enough to matter. What do you suggest, then?" He looked at her properly, for what I think was the first time since she'd arrived on the station 8 months earlier. "You're the welfare officer. Officiate." It was the first time I had heard him use her title without any trace of irony in his voice at all. I wish I could tell you that Thurn's change of heart settled everything cleanly, that from that moment forward the path forward was obvious and calm. It was not. Between his question in the corridor and the meeting in the drill bay, there was a night I still think about more than almost any other part of this, because it is the night everything nearly went wrong for an entirely different reason. Word travels fast on a station this small, even without scent to carry it. By the following morning, rumors of something happening with the drill crews had reached the command level through channels neither Priya nor I had used, garbled and half-formed the way rumors always are, and Thurn, still frightened by what she told him, made a decision on his own that he did not run past either of us first. He ordered a temporary lockdown of the lower tunnel access, effective immediately, citing an unspecified safety review, and posted 2 senior crew at the checkpoint with instructions to log anyone attempting to enter or leave the deep levels. It was, I understand now, meant as a precaution. It read, to the 12 Kelvith who had spent a week believing nobody in authority was listening to them at all, as confirmation of exactly the thing they'd feared. Confinement. Punishment before any hearing. The quiet start of exactly the crackdown Priya had warned would make everything worse. I found out because Vantra found me first, moving fast down the crew corridor, her tail rigid with alarm even before she spoke. "They know," she said. "Or they think they know. Half the drill crew is at the checkpoint right now, and it isn't calm." The air in that corridor, by the time Priya and I reached it, was the worst I had smelled since the day the 16-hour order was announced. Worse, in some ways, because this time there was no ambiguity in it at all. Pure, unfiltered anger, thick enough to taste, radiating off a dozen Kelvith packed shoulder to shoulder against two nervous crewmates who had never wanted checkpoint duty and clearly hadn't been told what to say to a crowd this size. Priya did not raise her voice. She walked directly into the middle of it, between the checkpoint guards and the drill crew, and said, loudly enough to be heard but not loudly enough to sound like a command, that this lockdown was a mistake, that she had not authorized it and had not asked for it, and that she was going to the chief right now, in front of all of them, to have it reversed before it became the very thing everyone in that corridor was afraid it already was. It was, I think, the first time any of them had seen her take a visible position in public, on their side, against station authority, rather than simply observing from the edges of a room. I do not know if it was the words or simply the sight of her doing it that mattered more. But the anger in that corridor did not vanish, it did not even fully settle, but it stopped climbing, which at that moment was the only thing that mattered. She found Thurn within the hour and did not soften what she told him. "You almost undid 3 days of work in one order," she said. "If I hadn't been standing in that corridor when it happened, I don't know what would be true right now instead of what is." Thurn, to his credit, reversed the lockdown before the shift changed again, and made a point of doing it publicly, over the same general comm channel that had announced it. It was not enough, on its own, to undo the damage completely. But it was enough, barely, to keep the 12 drill crew willing to sit in a room with him at all, one evening later, instead of simply acting on their own the moment his back was turned. I have thought since that this was the truest lesson of that whole terrible week, that even a chief who finally believes the right person can still, in a single anxious hour, come within a breath of proving every fear that person was trying to prevent. Here is what Priya did, and I want to describe it plainly, because it was not dramatic in the way Ossic's story had been. There was no override key wrenched from a stranger's hand, no sedative, no single moment where danger was physically stopped by a fast reflex. It was slower than that, and in some ways harder to watch, because it asked something of everyone in the room, not just of her. She asked Chief Thurn for one thing, to let her speak to the organizing group directly, without discipline hanging over the conversation like a blade, before the shift change went into effect. He agreed, reluctantly, on the condition that Vantra and I be present as witnesses, since he still did not fully trust her judgment when she was standing alone. We met them in the drill bay the following evening, 12 Kelvith, tired, visibly thinner than they'd been a month before, angry in a way that finally, in that enclosed room, filled the air with scent so thick it was genuinely hard to breathe past it. Copper and wet stone together, fear and fury layered over each other like sediment. For the first time in weeks, I understood immediately, from smell alone, exactly how much danger we were standing in. Priya, standing calmly in the middle of it, understood nothing at all from smell. She understood it from watching hands and shoulders and how far apart people stood from one another, and who looked at whom before anyone spoke a word. She did not tell them they were wrong to be angry. She said, first, plainly, that she agreed with them. The quota was unreasonable. The rationing had crossed from difficult into genuinely dangerous. Corporate's flat refusal to adjust either was, in her own words, a failure of basic care for the people keeping the station alive at all, and she was not going to stand in that bay and pretend otherwise to make anyone's evening easier. Then she told them, carefully, what the twins had confirmed in detail, that a sudden full stoppage, at 16 hours' notice, risked a seal failure in the lower tunnels that could kill people who had never agreed to die, making a point to a company that would not even read the incident report carefully once it happened. She did not say this to frighten them into obedience. She said it the way you tell a friend a hard truth, calmly, without performance, without raising her voice even once. "You're not wrong to refuse to keep working like this," she said. "You're wrong about the shape of the refusal. A stoppage that gets people killed doesn't force corporate to fix anything. It gives them a disaster to blame on you instead, and a permanent reason never to trust a Halvan Reach labor complaint again, no matter how justified. I think there's a version of this that gets you what you actually want, without anyone going into a tunnel that isn't safe to leave unmonitored." One of the 12, An older hauler named Fessick, who had worked the deep levels longer than almost anyone on the station, stepped forward, his scent sharp with a distrust he made no effort to hide. "You reversed a lockdown for us yesterday. Today you're telling us to stand down from the one plan that actually has teeth. Forgive me for wondering which version of you is the real one, Officer Sen." "Both of them," Priya said, without flinching from it. "I stopped a lockdown because it was unjust and it would have made things worse. I'm telling you to change your plan because it's also going to make things worse, just more slowly, and it'll take some of you down a tunnel that isn't safe to leave the way you're planning to leave it. I'm not on Thurn's side today any more than I was on it yesterday. I'm trying to keep this station from losing people either way it breaks. And if the grievance doesn't work? If corporate ignores 12 signatures the same way they ignored one chief's requests for weeks? Then you'll have lost nothing you have right now, and you'll still have every option you have right now, including the one you already built," she said. "But you'll have tried the version that doesn't require anyone to gamble with a tunnel seal first. I'm asking you to spend one night on the safer bet before the dangerous one. That's all I'm asking." Fessick held her gaze a long moment, his tail motionless, and I watched something in the set of his shoulders shift, not agreement exactly, but a willingness to keep listening that had not been there a minute before. What she proposed was not clever in any dramatic sense, and I think that was, in its own way, the point. A formal, documented, simultaneous grievance filing, timed precisely to the shift change, supported by DOS's medical logs on malnutrition and by the structural risk assessment the twins were willing to put their own names to publicly. A refusal to work the 16-hour extension specifically, framed as a safety objection rather than a stoppage, which under the station's own operating charter, Chief Thurn could not simply override without corporate approval he did not currently possess. Loud, on the permanent record, impossible to quietly dismiss. And safe, because the tunnels would still be properly shut down and monitored in sequence, not abandoned mid-cycle by 12 angry people all walking out at once. It took most of that night to convince them. I will not pretend Priya did this alone. Vantra spoke plainly. In the blunt technical register, only a Gurn engineer could make land in that room. A drill head left mid-cycle doesn't just stop, she told them. It keeps radiating heat into the surrounding rock for close to an hour after shutdown, unmonitored, in a network where 3 of your own seals are already running near tolerance because of the cold we've all been living with for a month. I have felt those seals with my own hands. I know what a stable one feels like and what 1-2 degrees from failure feels like, and right now I could not tell you with confidence which of the deep seals are which, because nobody has had the crew hours to check them properly in weeks. If all 12 of you walk out of that tunnel network at once, with no one left to watch what those seals do in the following hour, I cannot promise you the tunnel you leave behind is the same one still standing when the next shift finally goes down to check on it. The room was quiet after that in a way it had not been quiet before, the anger still present but no longer certain of itself, and I watched more than one of the 12 look toward the tunnel entrance behind them as if seeing it, for the first time, as something other than simply theirs to walk away from. I spoke too, about Ossick, about what almost happened to him and what almost happened because of him. Eventually Dossa came and stood with us as well, since word had reached her by then, and her long, patient presence seemed to settle something in the room that none of the rest of us could have settled alone. But it was Priya who had read the room correctly from the very beginning, who had known there was a plan forming before any censor did, who understood that the difference between a disaster and a resolution was never whether the crew's anger was justified. It was whether anyone found a way to give that anger a shape that could not be dismissed, and could not get anyone killed in the giving of it. By morning, Chief Thurn had a formal, documented safety grievance on his desk, signed by all 12 senior drill crew, supported by medical and structural evidence, timed exactly to the moment the 16-hour extension was due to begin. He could not implement the extension without violating his own charter's safety override clause, and he knew it the moment he read it. He sent it up the chain that same hour, flagged urgent, with his own signature added beneath theirs, which none of us had asked him to do, and which mattered more to the crew, I think, than almost anything else that happened that week. Corporate answered in 9 hours, faster than any message we had received in the entire length of the delay. The shift extension was rescinded. A partial ration increase was authorized from station emergency reserves, effective immediately, pending the supply ship's eventual arrival. It was not everything the crew deserved. It was more than almost anyone on Halvan Reach had believed possible 3 days earlier, when the only options on the table had seemed to be quiet suffering or a disaster loud enough to be noticed. The supply ship arrived 6 days after that, 20 days later than corporate's own worst estimate. Nobody had died. Nobody had been confined, disciplined, or quietly blamed once the danger passed, the way I half expected someone would be. The lower tunnels never lost a single seal. 2 days before the ship arrived, Ossick was released from confinement pending a final review that would, eventually, result in a formal warning rather than the dismissal he'd clearly braced himself for. I was in the corridor when he came out, thinner than before, quiet in a way that no longer read as dangerous, only tired and ashamed. He found Priya in the mess that evening and stood near her table for a long moment before sitting down across from her, which took, I think, more courage than anything he'd done in the recycler bay. I looked at the drill crew's grievance, he said. The one that actually worked. It's not so different from what I wanted. I just didn't know how to ask for it without breaking something first. You didn't have anyone showing you the other way existed, Priya said. That's not entirely your fault. It's mine too, a little. I should have been watching closer, sooner. Would it have mattered if you'd caught it a few days earlier? I don't know, she said honestly. Maybe. I'd like to think so. I try not to spend too much time on the version of the story where I was faster, because it doesn't help either of us now. I'd rather spend it making sure the next Ossick has a form to fill out before he has a reason to reach for an override key instead. He didn't say much after that, but he stayed at the table longer than he needed to, and when he left, his scent, for the first time in weeks, matched exactly what his face and posture suggested it should. Relief, plain and unguarded. It was, I realized watching him go, the most honest I had ever seen him. I found Priya sitting outside the crew airlock the evening the ship finally docked, her notebook closed on her knee, watching the loading lights blink across the hull through the viewport, one after another, steady and ordinary. She looked tired in a way I had started, finally, to recognize without needing any scent at all to confirm it, just the set of her shoulders, the stillness of her hands. I sat down beside her, the metal decking cold through my lower carapace. Thurn thanked you today, I said. In front of the senior crew. Properly, this time. No irony in it at all. I heard. You don't seem like someone who just won something. She was quiet for a moment, the way she often was, and I had learned by then that her quiet was not empty. It was full, the way our air is always full of scent, except hers was a kind of fullness I would never be able to smell, only wait for, patiently, the way I imagine Dossa waits for most things. Nobody had to lose for this to go well, she said finally. I think that's the part everyone had the hardest time believing. Thurn thought his only options were force his way through it, or let it become a disaster he'd have to clean up afterward. The crew thought the only way to be heard was to make something break loudly enough that it couldn't be ignored. I just spent 3 months writing down what was actually true in a room, instead of only what people said out loud in it, until there was enough truth written down that nobody could pretend the danger wasn't real, on either side of it. I thought about Ossick, alone in his quarters awaiting formal review, a 19-year-old who had done nothing but the same math the 12 senior crew had done later, only sooner, only alone, only without anyone reading the room carefully enough to catch it before he reached for an override key instead of a grievance form nobody had ever offered to help him fill out. You could have caught his plan sooner, I said. If Thurn had believed you the first time you asked him to trust a hunch, before any of this ever needed to go this far. Maybe, she said. I think about that more than you'd guess. But I don't think the lesson is that everyone should have believed me sooner because I turned out to be right twice in a row. I think the lesson is that a station this size should never have had exactly one person capable of noticing the thing the senses can't measure, and made her prove it twice, at rising cost, before anyone in charge would listen without demanding evidence first. Fessick came by the airlock corridor while we sat there, on his way to help with the incoming cargo manifest, and he stopped, briefly, in front of Priya rather than simply passing us by the way he might have a month before. I checked your judgment against someone else's before I'd act on it, he said, without preamble, which I had come to understand was as close to an apology as a hauler of his generation tended to offer. I won't pretend that changed overnight just because the grievance worked. But I wanted you to know I noticed it. And I noticed you didn't say anything, either time, about being checked. I didn't need you to trust me, Priya said. I needed you to still be alive to decide whether to trust me later. That was always the more important order of operations. Fessick held her gaze a moment, nodded once, the way Kelvith do when a thing has been settled without needing further scent to confirm it, and went on his way. Priya watched him go, and I thought, though I could not smell it to be sure, that something in her had eased slightly, some small weight finally set down after being carried a very long time. I did not have an answer for that. I still do not, fully, Even now, telling this to you. She picked her notebook back up, opened it to a fresh page, and started writing something new. I never found out what, and I never asked. Some silences, I had learned by then, were worth leaving exactly as quiet as she meant them to be, not because I couldn't smell them, but because I finally understood what they were for. The supply ship's cargo doors opened 3 hours later. Fresh rations, replacement filters, mail from 6 systems away. Ordinary things for an ordinary station on an ordinary evening. It did not feel ordinary to me. It felt like the first truly calm evening on Halvan Reach in over a month, where the quiet in the room was simply quiet, nothing hidden underneath it, straining to stay buried. And for the first time since Priya Sen had come aboard as a joke nobody quite remembers making anymore, every one of us in that mess hall, human and otherwise, was finally breathing exactly the air we smelled, and nothing else besides.